Today I want to talk about a topic that I haven't covered on the channel at all, and that is the topic of thought forms, so let's get into that. I am Dave, the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. If you like what I do here and you want to support the channel, link in the description of the Patreon where you can get exclusive access to videos early, Patreon exclusive videos, and the Occultic Manual series, which is a monthly write-up that I aim at being more instructional than what I have here on the channel usually, and less unapproachable than what you might find in one of those dusty old grimoires I like to reference on the channel. If any of that sounds interesting to you, looking forward to seeing you on the Patreon, and if you're already on the Patreon, you have my thanks for your continued and ongoing support. Thought forms are what their name implies. They are forms made of thought, and in Western occultism, it is believed that if a form is thought enough times, it will become real. The reason for this is that the thought will have accumulated enough energy on the mental plane to where it can manifest into the astral plane. And from there, what will end up happening is the astral plane will then cause it to manifest in the physical world. This is usually done in small scale to people's lives. Here's an example. As part of a get-together, a friend of the family would often comment about how whenever he was eating is when the waitress would go to check up on him, and this happened every time without fail. And usually he would phrase it like, every time they always come around when I'm eating, or they always come around when I have food in my mouth, right? That kind of thing. That is one of those things, and he would actually wait sometimes, and then just to prove that it was true, he would wait, and then the second he started eating, that's when they came over. This is how it works. If X, then Y. Usually phrased as whenever to give it some form of inevitability. Whenever X happens, Y also happens. This is very common, and usually is framed negatively. Whenever I go to mow the lawn, it starts to rain. Whenever I get a bunch of money unexpectedly, I have to spend it in an unexpected expense. And so thought forms can be a kind of negative thing in your life. Now, you will gradually pick up on them, and they are usually really interesting to just kind of analyze, because usually they are a thought pattern that you have regularly that is being reinforced. This is what I mean. You acknowledge it verbally, and the verbal component of magic is the airy component of magic. You know, we have the emotional form, we have the physical movements, which are also actions, we have the energy that we are putting into the ritual, and then we are speaking, and the speaking is the actual airy element, and air corresponds to thoughts. So therefore we are reinforcing our thought patterns whenever we verbally acknowledge them. It is important to get your thought forms under control, because if your thought forms are out of control, you're going to be at best in a constant state of spirit and thought-induced stagnation, and at worst, completely destitute and unhealthy whenever you have any issues whatsoever. Now, I do have some thought forms. Everyone has thought forms. Now, my thought forms have been trained to be fairly positive. They just kind of incidentally happen. So I have some very wonderful thought forms that you can try. Whenever I have large expenses, I always have enough money to cover them, and I always know what they are in advance. I always know what bills I'm going to have, and I always know where I'm going to have any issues. Recently, I had to fix my car, and so I went to go pay the car guy because I wasn't going to a garage. I was having somebody local fix it up for me, and I kind of had this weird ping of, hey, don't spend money. So I was kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird. So I save up my money, and I end up having more than I usually have in my account. I back off for a bit, and then when I go to check the balance after he has cashed the check, it turns out that the bank had accidentally charged me twice and put in a correction. So if I had not had that extra money in my account, I actually would have overdrafted because of a fuck up on the bank's part, and that would have been a bigger hassle. But I listened to my intuition, and I have that thought form of, I always know what bills I have in advance, and I always have enough money to pay them. I always make sure that I have the money to pay all of the expenses before the expenses come. Now, I do have unexpected expenses every now and again, but I always have money to pay them. Another thought form I have that is really handy and has been very useful for my psychological health has been that I make more money every month than the previous month, right? Now, it's not always through the same sources. You know, I have my day job, I have my Patreon, and I have the tiny bit of ad revenue that this channel makes, but they all increase, and they all increase continuously over the course. And I have a spreadsheet, and I keep that spreadsheet nice, and the only one that really doesn't increase is the day job, funny enough. But every month when I take all the numbers and I put all of the numbers into my spreadsheets, I'm always cash flow positive and I'm always making more than I made the previous month. And so I reaffirm this every single month, and it has been an affirmation for going on a few years now. So the question becomes, how do we make it so that we can change our thought forms and change them into being beneficial? Well, the first act is you can use magic. If you have identified a thought form, what you can do is you can burn a yellow candle and have the statement of intent being changing the thought form into what you desire the thought form to be. So if you're a person suffering from the thought form of every time I get a sudden influx of cash, I have an unexpected expense, what you can change that to every time I get a sudden influx of cash, I have an unexpected expense that only takes up a small portion of the money I unexpectedly got, and my life is better off for having spent that money. The way I modified mine was very similar. I had the, whenever I have a large expense, it always improves my life in a noticeable way. So usually this is going to be when I have a health issue or, some kind of unexpected thing where I have to get a new piece of furniture, that kind of thing. That's happened before. Usually it's health, living situation, car. And whenever I spend a bunch of money on those things, my life dramatically improves. But when it comes to altering your thought forms, the two best ways are going to be magic and repetition. You can reinforce it whenever you notice something, and then you, instead of having that thought form, you end up changing it into the thought form. For example, the unexpected expenses one that we've been using. Whenever I receive a large influx of cash unexpectedly, I end up having to spend some amount of it, and that ends up dramatically improving my life. Effectively, what you're doing is whenever this thing happens, Y also happens, and when Y happens, Z happens. So you have X happening, Y happening, and Z happening. Now, the reason why thought forms are so invasive and so common, and how they even work, is that when you have these thoughts, your brain will get into a habit of thinking that thing. Sometimes you will think that exact phrase, even. And when you think about these things, it reinforces them. Now, the energy of those thoughts goes into the mental plane, and then it comes down to the astral, and it effectively sets a trigger condition in the astral to manifest what that thought form is trying to manifest. Now, this is where we can get into mantras. If you start with a mantra, and every morning and every night when you say a mantra, you can say a mantra over and over again, and you can repeat it to yourself, and eventually that will develop into a thought form. So if you have something that you want to manifest, you can manifest it in a fairly plain and simple method. Now, there is another kind of thought form that I want to mention, and that is going to be subconscious barriers. This is where you have something that you are trying to manifest either mundanely or through magic, and it just seems to get a little bit farther away from you. It's just kind of out of reach. It's there and you can see it, but it's just out of reach. And you always have this thing where it's almost like the individual self-sabotages in order to keep themselves from getting their desired result. This is also a thought form, and this is a subconscious barrier. What this is that you have a deeply held belief that you should not, for some reason, have this thing. I want $1 million. Well, your subconscious believes that if you had $1 million, you would overdose on hookers and blow. I want the big titty goth GF. Well, your subconscious believes that if you had the big titty goth GF, she would absolutely make your life miserable, and you know that, which is why you don't get one. This is why you don't approach the black cat woman, despite the fact that you're a golden retriever guy. The solution to this, once again, is going to be rituals and mantra. This is where we alter our subconscious's point of view and make it so that our subconscious not only allows us to get the thing, but makes it so that us getting the thing is actually better than if we didn't have it at all.